Your messages, your loyalty, your support is what fuels this radio program. And without you, we wouldn't have it. So once again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I also want to thank some of the people that keep things moving. Vic Giza with his wonderful art every week, putting a smile on our faces. Tyler, Samantha, and many others who lend us a hand every so often. New year, new music, additional topics. As I said before, the topics that used to be covered on Sanitas are now coming to Veritas too. So you'll have a plethora of new things this year. I also need your input. Shortly, you will have a poll where you'll be able to vote for your favorite topics. I want to hear from you. I want to feel your pulse, because you are the ones who are going to be shaping this program from this point forward. You've always had, but I haven't done a poll for a long time, so I think it's time for us to do so. 8 years, now we're starting the 9th, but as far as this show is concerned, I am very excited to still be around, to still be on the air, even though certain outfits out there from the media are considering outfits like Veritas to be fake news, when in fact, are the mainstream media themselves. So the fact that you're listening to this program, waking up to the truth every week, waking others up all the time, I'm just flattered, humbled, honored to still be able to conduct this program. As I said in the past few days, for those who don't like PayPal, now you have Stripe, another payment method. PayPal's still around. Also, we are bringing back Bitcoin by popular demand. I stopped using it a long time ago just because I saw the Bitcoin go down and I didn't know if it was going to survive. But as of today, it's $715 a Bitcoin. It's still going, so why not give a chance to those people who want to pay with Bitcoin? So that's another option available to you. Now, here are some ideas for the holidays. Now that Season 8 is over, we have the 8 gigabyte futuristic metal case USB drive available with all the shows of Season 8 and some bonuses inside. So check it out on the Veritas store. Also, if you never listened to Sanitas, there's 3 full seasons available to you. You can still subscribe. There's one subscription type that gives you 1 full year to listen and download to all the programs. So even if you have and you want to buy it for somebody else, you can still do so by going to the website and buying a subscription for them. The same thing you can do here on Veritas. So great options for the holidays. You don't have to think about what to give. A pair of socks, stuff that people are going to be putting away in a drawer somewhere. Give them the gift of truth or the gift of health. What can you expect the new season? Well, lots of great guests. We have Peter Schiff coming in the next few days and other surprises for the near future. So stick around. And for those of you who still have the grandfather rate, thank you for sticking around for so many years. It really means a lot to me. I'm going to make our intros shorter, but tonight being the season premiere, I just wanted to give you a heads up of what's coming and basically to just celebrate with you. As always, if you want to listen to tonight's radio program and 8 full seasons, hundreds of hours of truth, you know what to do by now. Just go to veritasradio.com and click on the subscribe button. And if you want to get in touch with me, want to be a guest on this radio program, have a guest suggestion, or simply have feedback, I always love to hear from you. And for our Season 9 premiere, once again, we are delighted to have our friend Cliff High from halfpasthuman.com join us tonight on Veritas. Hello, Cliff. Thank you for joining us, and welcome back for another year.
Thank you very much. It's turning into something of a tradition, yeah.
Absolutely. And before we started the break, I noticed that we're both coughing a little bit, not because I have the flu or anything, but you mentioned that you had the same situation going on over there in Washington. What's going on? Do you think chemtrails have something to do with this?
Yeah, I certainly do. And we're in a situation where we've got chemtrails as well as these squalls or line storms that are blowing through. So, it's really weird, but when they form up chemtrails, they will make giant mats of them here off the West Coast because they know they're going to blow east. And so, they're actually staged to up here to blow east for whatever effect they're attempting to achieve. But of course, we're underneath them while they're doing that. So, we've just had kind of rough air here for a few days. It's okay when it's raining, but then it lets up and then you can see the chemtrails and then you're off hacking and coughing again.
One thing I've noticed on my side here, I've never woken up in the middle of the night to notice my mouth, my tongue dry as a leaf. I've never seen that happen. Do you think they actually take the humidity out of the air?
Certain of that. I've actually done tests to that effect and seen 7 and 9 degrees of relative humidity be dropped as the big chemtrail mats float across us here in western Washington. Bear in mind, I'm on the other side of the Olympic mountain range from the actual coast. They form these up in the calm air between the Olympic mountain range and the Cascade mountain range, which is over Puget Sound where I am. They don't go much further south than where I am because then you start getting into open plains areas and you can't create these big mats that they try and achieve with 5 and 6 planes flying in these crosshatch patterns. Once it reaches a certain volume, or it heats up or something, it lifts up and goes over the Cascade and heads east. But in the meantime, we're living with them here. I've been down into Portland and came up by train, was able to observe the activity from Kelso Longview, which is 40, 50 miles south of me. And you can just watch Puget Sound be covered, but no place much further south than Olympia or so. And the whatever effect they're attempting to achieve, a side effect of that is what it does to us for the humidity. And we know that they're spraying aluminum in a microparticle size, and that's exactly what people put into deodorants to try and glom onto the body and control moisture so you don't get bacteria. And we see aluminum used as a powder as a desiccant in all different kinds of applications. So it makes sense if you're going to be breathing that, you're going to wake up with it, on your tongue and all dried out. I keep water by my bed and have to wake up at night when they're doing the chemtrails just to keep enough fluids moving.
Interesting you mentioned deodorants because in the summer, I usually wear natural deodorant, but my wife says, hey, we're going to go to so-and-so's house. You're going to sweat. Bring the old deodorant. And I brought my good old, I'm not going to mention the brand, but I was wearing it. And not even half an hour later, now I guess I'm used to not wearing it, I started feeling sick. Almost as if the chemicals and the propylene glycol and whatever else gets into my head.
It certainly does. There are chemicals in there that can cross the what's known as the blood-brain barrier. Correct. And where do you pick it up? You pick it up on those areas of the body that are stretchy skin, such as under the arms, where, of course, the whole intent is to have all these glands there. And the glands, sweat glands, as they're sweating out, they take stuff in. It gets into the gland and gets into the glandular system, gets into the lymph, and then right into the brain, and there you go.
Yeah. Well, let's begin. Even though it's just a few hours ago, a few moments ago, hot off the press, you forwarded the December Alta report, and our listeners can buy it at halfpasthuman.com right now, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we just had it posted about noon West Coast time.
Even though I have the report here, I'll also be jumping around to discuss things that may or may not be included in the report, and I know you're always okay with that. Let's begin with the elections. December 19th. Smooth ride and Trump legally wins via the electoral votes, or are we still going to see any attempts by the opposition to derail that?
The emotional parameters say smooth. There's going to be attempts that are ongoing now, but they're going to be drained away of the energy and sort of fade. So our data sets don't show anything that's untoward there at all.
What about the delusional recount melodrama of Jill Stein? And do you think Soros and the Clintons were behind this recount attempt?
I think that they paid for that, but I don't think that they really wanted it to succeed. So I'm not sure what the point of it was. Anything that I would say to that would be speculation, but I'm quite certain that Soros's money is involved in that, as well as all of the let's call them anarchists. They're paid by him, so they're not very anarchistic. But the paid riots and so forth. Again, I don't know what his point is.
I just don't know what we're trying, just like Occupy Wall Street. What are they really trying to accomplish?
There's has been a move that we could characterize very in a binary fashion, okay? Let's just say that over time we've seen a slip in or a shift in the population. Let me phrase it a different way. A split. Let's say that we've seen a split in the population over the last 45 years in an accelerating fashion, but really since Nixon took us off the gold standard, we've seen a split from that part of the population that actually works for a living in terms of producing something of value that then the universe then rewards, and those people that actually don't produce anything. And by that I would mean government, any lawyer, anybody whose job is to shuffle things around. In the first category, I'm putting the people that grow stuff, the people that are machinists, the people that run plastic pressing mills, this kind of thing. Those individuals that are manufacturers that actually produce some atoms, move them around, and you in some way consume those atoms. Even if it's, a plastic glass you're using at a ball game, you're consuming those atoms that someone had to produce for you. So those are the producer class. The producer class, since Nixon took us off the gold standard, have been getting shafted daily. You'll be able to plot a correlation in tick by tick between the rise of the 1% and the reduction of the middle class, and the departure from the ability to have convertible gold for the U.S. dollar for the world reserve. So once that occurred in the 1970s, 72, we end up with a situation where the producer class is drowning under the effects of the debt that is making up the difference between the gap, so to speak. Those people that are not producing, that are simply consuming, are demanding more of the producer class, but they're not contributing for it. They're not paying universe back for it, so to speak. And so not contributing for it, there's a deficit. In a very real sense, the calories that somebody eats if they don't grow their own garden, they create a deficit that has to be made up by a farmer somewhere. And this is where the exchange system of money comes in to get that deficit filled by that farmer's surplus. And so that's really how universe works at this basic supply and demand level across all, and it's basically a barter system backed by gold, digits, dollars, all of this sort of thing. So now, since the gold convertibility, though, the money, the actual species, the currency that's been circulating, has not been holding its value. All through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that was not the case. The dollar did hold its value, and the middle class thrived, and the 1% was very, very, very small and didn't make much money because they had to actually pay out real stuff to get real stuff back. Then Nixon took us off the gold standard and said, we're not bound to reality anymore. Let's all party down and drink this illusionary beer. And they called the illusionary beer the U.S. dollar or the Federal Reserve note. And since then, we've been drinking this illusionary beer, but at some point, we wake up with the hangover of the illusionary beer, and we've got to suffer through it. And that's where we're at now, where the producers, those guys that have been suffering under the degradation of the dollar, are saying no more. I can't support, as a producer, a farmer out there, he's saying, I can't support 1,000 people with my machinery on the fields and stuff here, and also have to support another 1,500 people in a social system and still be able to pay taxes or be productive for myself. So I'm not going to do it anymore. And so that was the basic conundrum that society faces here. The cultural revolution of the past, say, 15 years or so, as we became more and more concerned about those people that choose to identify themselves with their genitalia to the exclusion of everything else, and to raise issues about it, as we move into these politically correct niche markets, so to speak, we are losing the producer class. We've lost them. And so what happened here was this last time was the military stood up and said, pointed fingers at the neoliberals, neocons, whatever you want to call them. It's just the same crew, Bush, Clinton. It doesn't make any difference. It's the supporting crew that is causing all the problems. And the military pointed fingers at them and said, y'all be crazy if you think you're going to win a war against Russia. And we're not going there. And so that was what happened in this episode. And so the cultural war that we have had in the past 15 or 20 years, which was being engineered to a certain extent, has failed. Now, the reason it has failed is multiplicitous. There's many, many, many different reasons at many different levels. But one of the primary reasons is that the demographics aren't there. So the cultural revolution that Mao was able to lead in his late leadership period when he should have been shuffled off into, the old Chinese leader's home. He was able to galvanize a very young social warrior population, and they took over the country of China, and he wrestled the power back from people that had undermined him over like 15 years or so. And so the same attempts, the same approach was used here with if you'll note, there's an amazing correspondence between Common Core and Mao's One Thought, One People. And the net result in Mao's case was was a rising demographic where the younger population, due to increases in food supply and so forth, outnumbered the older population, and they were able to force Mao's will out as social justice warriors. That has failed here in the United States because of one condition, and that's demographics. The millennials and the subsequent generations, while they're now voting and being activated, they are not sufficiently large enough to counter the emotional strength and the economic strength of the generations they're trying to oppose. So it won't happen here.
Now, let me stay with the gold standard for a moment. Since money is no longer backed by anything of value, namely gold, is the 99% suffering because their savings have been diluted by the creation of money out of thin air and artificially inflated the economy and reduced purchasing power?
Correct, because every time you hear the Federal Reserve say we're targeting 2% inflation, you need to put in a couple of different other words in your brain. Words have power. That's why they lie to you and use different words. They're targeting 2% inflation. What you need to hear is they are targeting 2% of my money. They're going to take 2% of my purchasing power. They want to reduce my ability to buy something by 2 cents out of every damn dollar. That's their goal. It's not a good thing. And they want to do this year after year after year. What am I to be left with? I had this friend of mine in the 60s who was a son of a baronet or something from England. I went to school with him, and he was really educated in economics at a time when all of his kids thought, economics was how many finnings there were to a mark, that kind of thing, right? And so, but he always said that inflation was the royals' way of politely stealing from the serfs.
Yeah.
And that's truly what it is anymore, and continuously. So we're kind of screwed. Now, the good news is we're at the end of the game. The reason that we're at the end of the game is because we face an extinction level event for our species over these next 10 years, or 20 years maybe. The extinction level event has to do with the return on investment for the amount of oil that we get for the amount of oil expended. It doesn't do you any good to pump a barrel of oil out of the ground if it took you 2 barrels of oil to find it. It's a net loss. And in our species at the moment, in order to maintain our civilization as it is, we need something between 12 and 15 barrels return on investment for every barrel we put out, just to maintain the illusion that we're an operating, functioning society, just in order to pay for the people that are not producing. So in the worst case scenario, we're going to have an economic crash so horrific that will coincide with a mini ice age, that all of the people that are not producers, all of the people that are living by virtue of the debt being put on the society, all of those people will be out pulling tractors through the field, or pulling the harvesting equipment in vast gangs of humans, because we won't have the oil to do that, and this will be the only way we can get calories. That's kind of like the worst case scenario, maybe as early as 10 or 20 years down the road, as the energy supplies dwindle, because it'll get to a point of rationing. You can't, for instance, run a carbine off of a solar panel. You can't produce enough energy off of solar panels to run a civilization and harvest the food it needs to eat, because the food it needs to eat is a very brutally intense kind of energy consumption that solar panels just don't do well at. And you would have to have vast quantities of them in levels that we are just not prepared for. So we face an energy crisis unlike anything that's been seen before. And had we dealt with this back in the 70s, at the time that Nixon took us off the gold standard, he thought that was his solution. Okay, he thought that solved the problem that we were facing. It wasn't that. We were facing the diminishing return on investment for energy, oil, and we needed to radically alter our society for sustainability at that point in the 70s. Now we don't have that option, in my opinion. I don't believe that over the next 15 years we could effectively have a revolution that put us all back into small farms where 60 or 70% of us were in fact continuously employed in the production of food and other goods. It just does not seem rational in my mind that such a thing is going to occur. So faced with this huge problem that we've got over these next decade, let's say 2 decades to be generous, but I don't have a real solid feeling on that second decade. But in this next 10 years, we've got to come up with a solution. And that solution has got to be radical enough that it provides basically what you and I and everybody else will think of as, 0-point energy or Captain Kirk's dilithium crystal energy. We need something that's a solution at that level, an energy solution that's such a big breakthrough that it gets us over this hump instantly. And instead of having to worry about 20-to-1 return on oil dropping down to 5-to-1, which is not sustainable, we would suddenly jump to say, 1,000 BTUs coming in for every fractional BTU being used. And in that case, it's like, hey, you're golden. You could run steam at that level at 0.5% efficiency if your BTUs didn't cost you anything. And you could be an advanced steam society and have steampunk spaceships for all that matters there, because you would have the ability to produce the BTUs for a low cost, which we don't quite have yet. So Tesla isn't going to do it. The solar panel revolution isn't going to do it. Even their maximum efficiency, they're running at maybe 18%, and that's 18% in a very narrow range, and it's not continuous. I've run solar panels, and of course now we've got chemtrails everywhere, which greatly reduce the efficiency of the solar panels. So we're finding ourselves in this kind of a weird little bind that's almost forcing us to, in my opinion, to shut off all the supplies too, and then negotiate with the breakaway civilization guys.
Now, since you mentioned oil, today, after 8 years, OPEC reached a deal, 2 years in the making to limit output. How will this change your projections then?
Nothing whatsoever. Doesn't change it at all. The issue is not abiotic oil, which does indeed exist. It's not like oil comes from fossils at all. The Russians have proved this. If you drill down deep enough, you can get all the oil you want. The problem is the cost of drilling down to achieve it increases your cost of oil that you have to put out in order to get that oil for every foot you have to go down. And so it's not a sustainable route for the 29 billion barrels of oil that we need as a global society. On an annual basis, it's not going to make any difference what they do in terms of reduction. They won't be able to get the price up there. The reason that we're running into this is the same reason that we had the oil crises in the 70s, which resulted from Nixon taking us off the gold standard. We don't have value in our money anymore. So the money keeps degrading. They keep producing vast quantities of it, which so far hasn't produced any inflation because they've been able to keep it out of the system and stored in such assets as weird old art that, doesn't produce anything. So it's a non-productive asset. Or they buy buildings where they don't really produce anything, so it's not flooding the economy with the fake money. Now, the issue for us with the energy and the money goes back to the idea that it takes real effort to achieve a barrel of oil extracted from the ground. It takes real effort, calories, sweat, blood, all of this kind of stuff to get an ounce of gold out of the ground. But it takes nothing whatsoever for somebody in the Federal Reserve to push a button and create $100 trillion. And so we're now coming to the point where all of humanity is realizing, I think I'd rather have the real barrel of oil, and you can keep your $100 trillion. And so at that point, which is where we're at now, and which is where we were in the 70s, you have to rebalance your social order in order to survive and thrive and get beyond it, to rise above it. And we're not doing that. We're not rebalancing our social order. We're not taking a hard look at what's really ahead of us. We're living in this delusionary world where it makes sense to worry about painting our airplanes pink in honor of someone's gender identity, and then also to worry about who gets to pee where.
True. Now, so it's not going to be solar, wind, nuclear, hydro.
No.
So we're talking about
nuclear maybe could have done it, but the way we took with nuclear is terrible, and it's a death sentence because of the route that we've taken with it. They've lost another reactor in Fukushima.
That's right, the earthquake. So we're talking about over Unity, 0-point energy devices. But if this makes it to the mainstream,
not even that. No, not even. You don't even have to go that far. Okay, there were people in the in 1800s and in the early 1900s up to say 1940s that were messing around with technology that produced something where you had a net gain that we would think of as over unity. But if you actually look at over unity, that implies that there's no cost to the energy. There's no capital investment in the device itself, or that's repaid relatively quickly. We don't even have to go that far. If we had a device we could make now that would amortize itself even over 100 years, but just sit there and produce electricity at an extremely low cost for 100 years, we could get by with that as long as our capital expenditure costs were low enough that we could get into vast replication of it. Make sense?
So they could actually meter it without fracturing the entire energy industry.
I think that doesn't matter anymore. I think we do need the energy industry, but the way we've been going about it is, and even in our reports, it's talking about how, in the 1990s, it was talking about changes that we're now living through. Some of those changes are, for instance, the drop in demand for gasoline because none of the millennials drive. The rise in certain kinds of diesel uses.
Because they have no jobs.
Correct. And there's no incentive for them. They're living in a social order of the cities. Also, bear in mind there's been a cultural change at a very deep level that you probably won't grasp. I'm going to put this kindly, just because of your maturing years here, okay? And here's the thing, Guy. The cell phone represents freedom to the millennial generation the same way the cars represented freedom to my generation, my parents' generation, etc. We used to socialize by a way of cars. It was our way of socializing was to get into a car and drive to where other people who were also in cars congregated. None of that is required anymore because of this abstraction of socialization that's been reduced to the cell phone. So you've got it with you wherever you go. So there's no real point to moving your atoms around when you get there, if you'll go and look, you see all these, I've seen it myself. I'll go to places
virtually,
and I'll see people that are in parties. That is to say they're in groups at places where people gather, Starbucks, restaurants, this kind of thing. And there's 5 people there and they're all looking at cell
phones.
Not at each other, but their own cell phones. So why bother being there?
At my restaurant, I wanted to they have this technology that allows you as a restaurateur to stop cell phone signals from disturbing people from doing this. But, I haven't done it. Now, since you mentioned Mao, have you looked into the Sesame credit or the obedience score that's going to be mandatory in China? And now it's a beta test?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. And see, that's the next step along on the idea that you can engineer a top-down society where you can say that, this culture is to be treated this way, and you get these, and you do it numerically. It's kind of like what I do numerically for emotions out of language. But in my case, I know that basically it's a by guess and by golly, and if I happen to get something, it's more luck than art, right? Or more art than science. They're in an engineering mindset, and they actually think they can engineer their society that way. It's a little scary, but I think it won't work.
Do you think that this is going to be technocracy coming to the Western world too?
I don't. Well, there's nothing in our data that suggests that. Okay, at the moment. Let's take a very broad kind of a view and say that would represent, what was that movie? Johnny Mnemonic?
Yep.
Okay, with that sort of dark vision of, what was the guy's name? The main actor, whatever the hell his name was.
Keanu Reeves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As he goes to China to pick up some, illegal bootleg data that they shove into his brain, right? And that vision of China, would match what we've just been discussing, wouldn't you think?
Well, the way I see China, ever since, Kissinger went there, I think they really wanted China to be the model of what they want for the world, obedient population, kind of a hybrid of communism and capitalism. And the way I see it now, they don't even have to shoot anybody like Tiananmen Square or run them through
Exactly.
a tank. But basically, you have this company called Tencent, which is related to Alibaba and their internet services. So if you misbehave, your score goes down. So I don't see why this couldn't happen here.
Well, okay, now see, here's the thing. If we look at the vision that was presented in that movie, just to give us something as a common stomping ground, when he's there, they were presenting a vision very much of that kind of China, where it was controlled remotely. And also, people would get out of hand if the digital fascism went too far, and you would get riots, because a lot of people might have their score demoted, even if it was by accident, right? And then they would go absolutely crazy, even if it was going to be corrected, and cause problems. And at the same time that was going on, Keanu Reeves came from a USA that was in a much more shattered condition than what was found in China, which was more or less monocultural in terms of how the movie presented it. And that's how our data sort of presents it, is that China may indeed be trying, the governments there may be openly and at all levels of their social engineering, trying for this monocultural approach. But our data sets would say that it's not really going to work. And it won't work here in the United States, even if there is an attempt to continue with the agenda. And it won't work here because, at its core, back to that whole thing, our money's no good. We can't support it. So in other words, it takes a lot of excess energy. It takes a lot of extra calories to provide food for people to run around and criticize other people in a politically correct fashion and try and make the society a particular way. And if you're running into an oil deficit, nobody's taking your money, you've got to go out and dig real gold in order to buy, uncontaminated wheat from China, or swap cows for people, with people in Mexico for silver. If you've got to do this kind of stuff, you're not running around wasting your time and energy with that other aspect of things. If you are trying to force that kind of civilization on things, then we run into a Pol Pot regime, where we note that they tried to do that. Pol Pot tried to organize a social order that, let's say he got the idea sort of from Castro and then went crazy, right? And the whole regime of Pol Pot, all the deaths and all of that, didn't last very long. And the only reason it could have lasted that long was because of the isolation of that small nation. You can't do that kind of thing in the U.S. We're too big, too diverse, too many ways to get out or screw around with it. They couldn't even effectively, by the way, manage prohibition. Prohibition was an absolute failure. The amount of booze consumed went up. And all we did was to transfer money to a criminal class.
Well, the same thing's happening with cannabis. I hate to use the name marijuana, because whoever's on top has the monopoly on that. Would you agree?
Correct, yeah. And we see that same kind of thing, as you say, occurring right there. And in no way do prohibitions or any of the controls in any way eliminate the behavior, especially in a nation as large as ours. If you get a small area, a small country, and you have your population of specific sizes, you can manage this for a longer period of time than you can in the areas that we live in, which are very diverse, populations of, shared mutual interest and differing levels of resources. And you just the idea that the powers that be are going to be able to control the USA over these next 15 years or so is an absurdity. China right now, the number one continual worry on the part of all the Chinese authorities, this government is the most heavily manned. That is to say, there's more people working for that government than any government on the planet. They have more resources at their disposal than personnel, money, you name it. China has got more resources at their disposal than all the other governments combined. And their continual top worry is the riots that may break out tomorrow. And this is because of the riots that broke out yesterday. And in a country their size, if they can keep the number of riots in any given year to under 110,000, the Communist Party considers that to be a real successful year.
And that's why they have this obedience score being mandatory in 2020. But folks, I have to recommend something. If you have Netflix, go and watch Black Mirror. Watch the first episode of the 3rd season, and you know exactly what I'm talking about here. People in the future may have kind of a chip in their retina or their eyes, and they'll be able to see everybody. I go, I see Cliff High, and I see your score. And we have any kind of interaction, and after we interact, I give you from 1 to 5 stars, and that's how people get their life. It's an incredible episode. I recommend it.
Yeah, it may be a good good view of things, but I don't buy it, Guy. I mean, I'm the idea of the Kurzweil vision of a Borg or humans with humans with stuff in them, making them more robots or robotic. It just does not work. It doesn't compute. This is all fantasy that only exists in the minds of those that are pumping out the predictive programming. So why does Hollywood want Mel Fabregas to be afraid of that vision? That's what you need to ask yourself. You need to ask yourself, why is over 90% of everything that Hollywood produces on the dark side? Okay, even if it's a comedy, it's a black comedy, a dark comedy. Why do all the movies have all the death in them all the time, continuously? It's because they're doing predictive programming. So I don't buy that idea that they can get chips to operate in the human eye consistently enough to be able to do any kind of an implant. The same thing is true of any other thing that's going to be in input into life.
Oh, believe me, and I don't want the fear either. But even right now with social media, you can see a lot of these millennials, they're affected with depression. If they put a post and half an hour later they don't have a like, that affects them psychologically and physically.
I know. They're just, it's really terrible. And they have no, so Nicholas Taleb, the author of The Black Swan and, Anti-Fragility, has coined a phrase, and he says it's IYI, that these individuals are intellectual, yet they are idiots. Okay. And they're idiots in the Greek sense of the word, which is somebody that is a social being that has no skills. Idiote. This was a specific class of an individual in the ancient Greek society that was accepted in the the city-state or the village that they lived in, but they weren't really participants. They lived outside of it. They were, the outsider, really, a fringe level kind of a thing. Now, it implied no social skills to the ancient Greeks. Here, it's sort of the reverse of that. These people have incredible social skills, but can't do anything else. I've actually seen a millennial faced with a gate in a chain link fence not be able to work out the mechanism to open up the gate. And a lot of these people that are intellectual yet idiots have no capacity for cognitive analysis to produce a defined result. That is to say, they can think about things and recite facts to you, but they don't know how to their mind is supposed to work in order to make A plus B equal C, let alone an A plus B, and then let's take a definitive leap to an E, because we've had some experience with these things and we know that those subsequent steps will be involved. So these guys just don't get it. They just can't get there. And it's made a real impact on society. It's made, even the sacking of groceries a longer occupation involved with these individuals because they're not trained to think or about their own efficiency and this sort of thing. They're just trained in an entirely different way. Their view of life is so different that it is in fact altering the society around us at a fast rate. Now, it's altering it faster because of the technology. So we have to acknowledge the impact of that. We also have to acknowledge the technology as support for the millennials. So if you take away the cell phone, if the cell towers die here in the United States, then we have an instant shift into a different society, and probably a month later, assuming that we're talking a situation where the cell phones don't come back, then a month later you've got a different USA, and things are entirely different then. And the ability, for instance, to drive a car to go get stuff becomes a real valuable skill. And there's no such thing as Uber or Lyft or any of this sort of thing. I'm not suggesting that will occur. We do have things like regional power outages ahead of us, and we do have regional disasters that'll relate to weather and so on, and will cause cell phones and this kind of thing to go down. But there's no reason to suppose at this stage that the distributed cell phone tower system would be particularly vulnerable. It's not even vulnerable to EMPs, for instance. You hear you'll see these things online where you get these emails, I do anyway, and being in the woo-woo business, and it's a spam kind of a thing where they want you to worry about an EMP coming. Yeah. That's an electromagnetic pulse. And they say, oh, an electromagnetic pulse is going to come and wipe out the millennial generation. Most of them will die without their cell phones in a week. I know, I'm serious. I got an email like this.
It might happen, really.
It might happen. Well, here's the thing, though. In order to do that to the United States, you can't do it with a single nuclear weapon, right? There's no height or distance above the United States at which you can detonate any weapon that we're familiar with at the moment that would create a pulse that would damage the national grid. So you'd have to have I've seen it calculated 250 minimum. Excuse me. You'd have to have 250 nuclear bombs exploded at a particular altitude in order to produce an EMP that would take out our national grid and take out the cell phones. So it's just not going to happen. And also, there's no way to coordinate that at the moment.
Now, increases in minimum wage, and we'll have Peter Schiff coming to the show in a few days. But you see this everywhere. People want increases in minimum wage, which I think they don't work, and for multiple reasons that I'm not going to discuss today. But will AI, artificial intelligence, replace most of the workforce? And if so, how will the government handle the increasing unemployment? Now, we're seeing this AI happen a lot lately.
No, we're not. I'm sorry. I get really pissed about this. Okay. It's not your fault. You're using terms that are put out there. It's this AI term is bogus. It is not artificial intelligence. These are what we used to call expert systems and machine learning. Machine learning is even a bad description. It's not machine learning so much as machine recording, because they don't learn in the sense that humans learn and can make a decision and so on. All they do is record a preponderance of data, and then they've got an algorithm that says if this size of data is bigger than that size, you go with the biggest size.
A glorified computer.
In no way is expert system correct anything more than the software we have at the moment. There is no AI operating above the surface of the planet now. There's no AI out and about in the entire planet, with the exception of these qubit machines.
All right, but I don't want to interrupt you. Bad choice of semantics on my part, but the robots are happening. At least in the restaurant, fast food industry, it's happening. They're replacing people.
Yeah, and theoretically, that would lead you to believe that you're seeing a trend that will continue. But all of these trends are predicated upon the underlying continuation of the energy model that is degrading so fast, it's affecting everything in sight, and that it just hasn't hit a generalized level yet. It's affecting it if you're looking for it. So the degradation of the price of oil and the degradation of the energy systems globally has already taken the number 2 just-in-time shipper on the planet out. They declared bankruptcy. They're selling bits and pieces of themselves off. They're going to be disorganized and disrupted for years. So there goes the number 2 shipper on the planet. So tell me what planet, what world would see, under those kind of conditions, would see increasing robots spreading rapidly throughout our particular backwater, formerly well-electrified society. It just isn't going to happen. Yeah, there's robots now, but 5 years from now, we may be hard pressed to install new power plants. And to hell with the robots.
Now, Soros, will he be around much longer, pulling strings around the world?
You mean in terms of is he going to die? Yes, he will die soon. He'll hopefully die
preferably, but pulling strings.
Yeah. See, here's the thing. He is being exposed by the same generalized, let's call it a meme or a movement that's going through our social order, and that is, again, going back to the degradation of the money. So Soros, as long as people took his bribes and didn't say anything about being bribed, you'd never know he was bribing people. So the fact that he pays for Black Lives Matter leaks out because someone is not satisfied with what that money buys. The bribe just doesn't take anymore. And that's happening globally. Corruption is coming out everywhere. It always happens. Corruption comes out came out over the last 200 years of the Roman Empire failing. You saw the huge amount of corruption coming on out. Now, that happened there very slowly because of the nature of their social order and the lack of the media and the movement of currency. Here, in our current pan-global civilization, it's coming out very rapidly. And so as the money degrades, the people that say, well, yeah, it's $20,000, it doesn't buy my silence the way it used to, right? I want 120,000 now, and maybe that'll keep me silent for another 6 months. Well, at that point, you can see as the person doing the bribe that you're screwed. That, the escalation of that effect is going to be such that 6 months from now, they're going to want 1.2 million to keep their silence another 6 months. And so you're not going to get anywhere. And that's actually what's going on. People are breaking out of all of this and revealing stuff, as we see with WikiLeaks and all of the emails and all of this kind of stuff, right? As the dollars degrade, as the purchasing power of the money degrades, as it is polluted by the powers that be, as happened in Rome, corruption comes out. We have all the stories of Caligula, Nero, and all of this kind of stuff because it was common knowledge at the time, because the currency of the denarius was so polluted at some of the point there that there was only 2% silver in the thing.
It's funny that you were talking about the Romans. I was thinking about Caligula and the fact that he loved sweet wine, and he used to boil this sugar on lead containers, and all that lead would leach out. He would drink it, and he would get worse and worse and worse. He was a psychopath already, but, anyway.
Sure. Now, well, no. Hey, wait. Stay with that for a second, okay? Because, look, I don't want to be too melodramatic about it, but, you're drinking the wine too, guy. You're not getting pewter. You're not getting the lead out of pewter and the pewter cups that the Romans used to use. But every night when you go to bed, every day when you walk around, somebody's pumping your body full of mind-destroying metals. The
sulfites?
Same thing that... No, the chemtrails. The aluminums, barium, strontium, all of this kind of stuff. So the same effects on your brain are going to be perceived, and we're seeing it through our social order now. Look at how, if you look over the last, I first saw my very first exposure to chemtrails being created as mats with multiple planes was in 1996. In Puget Sound. I happened to go out on a kayak that I was testing, a little trimaran kayak I was messing about with, got trapped at this particular beach, had to spend a whole tidal cycle out there because I couldn't land, couldn't come back in. So I just sat around and with my binoculars just looked at stuff and saw them building this mat of gaseous stuff from the airplanes, and I basically thought, what the hell? Okay, so from 1996, you can plot an increase in the amount of mental illness and the cost it's taking, the toll it's taking on our social order at an economic level. And you can even see that some people are attempting to profit by it, by putting money into Alzheimer's institutions and all of this, because they're really sure Mel's going to end up in one, and they may be, in the powers that be, and they're just going to profit on Mel ending up in one because he's been breathing that aluminum all his life, and it's destroying his brain. And that's just the way it is with all of us. The social orders is actually attempting to profit from the degradation that is going on from the crap they're spraying up there. And they're profiting on it at another level. The stuff they're spraying up there is what's known as fly ash. Fly ash comes from coal plants. Coal plants produce fly ash as a byproduct of burning coal. And they call it fly ash not because it flies around, because it's so light and fluffy. And you mix it with a little tiny bit of air, and it becomes almost a slurry. That is to say, the air gets between the very fine microparticles of ash, and it sort of floats around like it was a fluid.
Are they doing the same thing with aluminum plants with fluoride? The way they get rid of it is by using...
No, that was steel. It was stannous fluoride. They had us eat this stuff in order to get rid of the toxic waste from the steel plants that was piling up in the East Coast. Mm-hmm. And they made everybody think that it was good for your bones and it would help your teeth. Right. And all it does is destroy your pineal gland and cause calcium problems throughout your body. And other mental issues and so on. Well, it's kind of the same thing. They had over $1 billion a year was paid out by the coal plants to get rid of fly ash. And you'll note it, I think it was probably late 1990s, there was a fly ash dam break in the southeast. and this mud-like material flowed out of this reservoir, the slurry, and it went down a sort of a hill into a small town and caused all kinds of problems, and many people were injured. I don't know if there were deaths. My memory doesn't go back that far, but it was a horrid accident and cost that particular coal-producing conglomerate like $3 billion to clean up, and then there were some fines by the government. Well, 2 years later, they weren't producing slurry at that plant anymore. And you've got to ask yourself, where was it going? And then you start seeing that slurry used to be produced at all these coal plants everywhere, and they're trying to shut the coal plants down as well. But as a side issue, the slurry used to be produced there, and it's just not piling up anymore. There aren't any more reservoirs, giant reservoirs of this slurry, the fly ash, being pumped out of coal plants to sit around and liquefy and sort of cool off and stuff before getting loaded into train cars and being pumped and taken someplace. And they used to have terrible time getting rid of them. It cost the industry $1 billion a year. And if you go and look at their taxes and stuff, the coal plants that are operating are hugely profitable because they're not paying this anymore. And in fact, they don't even have to pay anything. Train cars show up, long lines of them, and pull that slurry out, and off it goes.
Do you think we can link those trains to the plains?
Yes, you can. Mm-hmm. Yes, you can. Because we're out here in the West. This is where a lot of the activity is for those kind of plains because of the rotation of the planet. Mm-hmm. You spray something over the Pacific, the planet rotates underneath it, and it ends up in that part of the East Coast where you want it to end up on. Actually, I don't think it goes as far as the Rockies if you spray here. I actually think they have to spray on the other side of the Rockies in order to get it into the East Coast, but I could be wrong.
But if it hits the Rockies, all that water is going to be contaminated.
Correct. Oh, yeah, it has been. Oh, all of our forests out here are dying from aluminum. We've got so much in the way of heavy metals in our groundwater and stuff that they won't allow you to report that anymore from soil samples or from water samples or from tissue samples from any of the fish or the clams or mussels or any of that. You cannot report that at a public level without getting deep problems for that. It's like standing out here with a... Exactly. And there was a guy I know who was out here reporting the death of all of these tidal pools off of Vancouver Island on the west side of Vancouver Island, and his supposition was that it was Fukushima. That Fukushima radiation was destroying the littoral, the intertidal life of Vancouver Island and presumably all of British Columbia and most of the West Coast. And I would agree with his data sets, his suppositions, his results from his tests of going on out and looking and seeing that the life was dying. That was quite factual. But I'm not so sure that it was Fukushima that was actually causing that. And it was simply because what he was showing in terms of his photos and stuff had been seen in Alaska and California and Oregon and so on before Fukushima popped off. And we were all at that point debating as to whether or not it was as a result of chemtrails because of these mats that they would make. Now, bear in mind, when I say that these planes were making mats, we had, when I saw them in 96, there were 5 planes flying north to south and 7 planes flying east to west. And they were sort of like, as one might imagine, they were sort of weaving a cloth. Correct. Only in this case, they were laying out their big chemtrails when all the chemtrails were merging. And so from my vantage point down here near Nisqually Reach off of Lure Beach, I was able to see most of the northern boundary, way past Tacoma Narrows, way up past Seattle. So I was looking at most of the Puget Sound at that particular angle. And so we're looking at a mat that was perhaps, let's say, 200 miles long by 80 or 90 or 100 miles wide. So we're not talking anything that was small. Now, on the Pacific coast, on the ones I've been told that they do off of the coast of Oregon, by the guy who runs my servers, his nature of his job had him, one of his other jobs, he works 3 full-time jobs here, had him drive, and he was driving up the coast there on 101 in this coastal road. You get a good view of the Pacific Ocean for hundreds of miles. And he saw a chemtrail cloud bank that he's telling me, and this guy, I have every reason to trust his judgment based on what he used to do for the military, and he's telling me that it was 1,000 miles. That from his vantage point, and knowing the angles and so on, he was looking at something that was 1,000 miles long. Now can't see 1,000 miles, but just being able to see the thing up over his head, knowing how long he drove underneath it, seeing the consistency of the thing, and so on, he's saying it ran mostly 1,000 miles. And we have reports too of that time that shows the weird weather that occurs when these things blow over California, etc. So now they're spraying everywhere, but this particular kind of big mat approach was when in fact I think you have to also acknowledge the chemtrail technology is adapting. So we don't know, unless you're staying current, what kind of stuff they're having us drink in our wine at the moment.
As we're talking about chemtrails, I'm thinking of Prince, the late great artist that died. That song, what is it? What's the lyrics? Are we going to let the elevator bring us down? And he died in an elevator. But the reason why I bring him up is because shortly before he died, maybe a year or two, he granted an interview where he's talking about manganese as one of the reasons why the black population is so violent. Because they have been, exposed to this mineral. Have you heard about this?
Sure. Okay, this is you have to understand too that the black population relative to the white population in America, the black population has always been like 20 years ahead on any conspiracy. Okay, simply because they've been the victims of them all. Everything from Tuskegee, even further on back.
By the way, it's Dick Gregory. If anybody wants to Google that name or YouTube it.
Yeah. And so, so you see that is indeed part of the plan, is that you need if you're you have to look at it this way. If you're the powers that be and you can't gin up a war outside the United States anymore, and you're going to turn all of the tools you've got created to use against terrorists to domestic, in order to be able to control the population because they're rebelling, because the money is now stealing their wealth at the rate of 20 and 30% a year, not 2%. Once the hyperinflation hits, then what you've got to do is you've got to have the bad guy. And so the bad guy in this whole scenario are going to be all these people that are too violent and can't control themselves, and that basically are crowded into little urban areas where they can be, effectively controlled and popped off on command. And so you notice that we have the pop them off on command going these last few years of the Obama administration with, basically non-productive race riots. And by non-productive, I mean there was no causal agent for the race riots other than police brutality. Right. Whereas if we look at 1968 and the Watts riots, it's entirely economic. They've been going on for 15 years that had bled the black middle class in LA down to nothing, and the debts, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a response that was seeking a solution. Here it was just you're killing us. And there was no underlying social reason for any of the race riots that have been occurring, at least in let's say the last 10 or 15 years. Now the whole population is being outsourced, and we're all degraded under the falling money. But there's now less of a divide between people that are not 1%, regardless of color, race, gender identity, any of that. There's less of a divide between us than there is between us and the 0.1%. And so you've got to have somebody that's going to be the bad guy. They've got to do it in order to do that, they've got to have credible bad guys, and that's one of the ways they do it, is body and mind manipulation. They pollute the economic body of the country with bad money that has no store of value, yet they tell you to save in it. And then they pollute the food body of the country through GMOs, through the chemtrails polluting the lakes and the streams and the waters and the crops everywhere with the aluminum and so on. And they're going to get sort of the kind of response that they're after. It's just like in France, there was a movement made, I want to say in the late 70s, there was a deliberate movement made by government to try and get as many of the French people on antidepressants as they could.
You remember Reagan's words in the UN when he said our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside of this world. And in the last couple of days, mainstream media, the title is the U.S. military preparing for a next generation war in space. Who are the potential adversaries here?
Well, here's the thing. We've had this stuff in the data sets for a long time about what not jokingly, but just
Space
because the word
farts.
wasn't. Well, yeah, in the Space Goat Parts entity, there was this subset that was going to the idea of a cruise ship, a space cruise ship, with aliens that would come by and basically cruise around Earth the way that, you might have a cruise ship go cruise around some South Pacific island, that sort of thing. And, it's a goofy idea, but we see even just the other day, Twitter was censoring reports about these UFOs, about this UFO that was seen over 12 Turkish cities. And was seen very much like it was their version of Phoenix Lights. And here Twitter was censoring this. And it's like, what does Twitter care about UFOs over Turkey? Why should the Twitter organization give a damn one way or another? And so I think we're at that point where indeed the U.S. military, we know for as a trend that's been reported and led out to us with the predictive programming in the media, all the movies about space aliens and all of this. We know that the U.S. military, they even admit in the movies, and that's not denied in reality, that there's these people in holes in the ground reverse engineering all this space alien crap. And so we can certainly suspect that most of that is probably quite true. Now, in this last report, in the December report, if you go to the conclusion, you see that I'm saying that we're going to be faced with something that's coming up in 2017 and 18. I don't know when the disclosure is, but I think it's already happened at the elites level. And I think that what has occurred and has to occur at this stage is that the pan-global civilization that you and I live in has to acknowledge that we're not the first pan-global civilization of this level of technology here on Earth, and that there's been something in Antarctica that's going to force us to acknowledge that.
No, hold on, because I want to leave that for part two, because that's a long conversation. I was very surprised to see that in the conclusion, because you linked that to 1947 and other things. But let's leave that for later. The earthquake. Well, first of all, we know from Dr. Carol Russin, and she was the assistant to Dr. Werner von Braun, who said that the last card, because we had communism, we had the terrorism boogeyman, then a celestial object in the last card, an alien, a false flag alien invasion. Could this be the precursor to this?
Certainly. And that's exactly what they want to do. They need to have, as I say, the boogeyman, the bad guy to get us all to toe the line, especially as technology improves and we become, if you look at it a particular way, if you look at the development of technology like, say, Bitcoin is a distributed financial system that you can put on your PC or put in your phone that makes you as powerful as any central bank on the planet. And so you're as powerful as Yellen or any of those people because you can receive and mine and issue money. Real money, things of value, much more powerful than what the Federal Reserve pumps out. So imagine that's the direction in general that our technology will take over these next few years. And it won't go towards singularity, which implies the Kurzweil version is very much a top-down control system. If you think about it, nobody's ever going to become a Borg on their own, making their own devices and stuff. That vision of people with chips in their eyes and this kind of thing is entirely central authority pushing this crap into you. So it's not a natural organic expression of humanity.
But don't you see a bunch of impressionable people volunteering if they see that their lives will, quote unquote, improve with that technology?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, that'll happen. There's no question about it. And these people will die of horrible diseases very rapidly. And that'll be the end of it. It's not gonna work, dude. You can't have that level of penetration of the human body that is suggested by Kurzweil with anything close to our kind of technology now and have it function. So imagine, for instance, that you have a chip in your eye. Okay, that chip is in some way, in order to function, must have the capacity of carrying an electrical charge. That chip, it probably has some form of metal in it. But let's say that we come up with a way of carrying an electrical charge in nanoplastic. It won't make any difference because the analogy I'm going to use here, or the example, is quite valid regardless. That chip is basically a small energized electrical field. One day you're walking along and a high energy burst from some other device, your dishwasher, your computer, your garbage disposal, your refrigerator, a light bulb exploding, a high frequency fluorescent bulb out of whack. One of those will excite a sympathetic charge via induction in that chip and fry your eye, and you'll be blind. That's it. Same thing will happen with the chip they put next to your heart and so on. This stuff won't last more than one generation.
But that's if you think that the technology would be more, let's say, metal or synthetic. But what about biocomputers or DNA computers with nanotubes?
Okay, it won't make any difference. The reason it won't make any difference is because it will have to be asymptomatic to the human body in order to control you. So in other words, let me put it to you this way. If you wanted to be able to read something that way and receive information into my eye, if I wanted to achieve that, I have to put something into my eye that is not functioning as my eye does now, right? Okay, so most people don't understand how the eye functions. The eye is one of your four senses. You only have four senses. You don't have five. That's a lie by the people that want you to think that you are actually your body. You are not your body. Your eyes, your ears, your sense of taste and your sense of smell, these are separate subsystems. You do not, for instance, feel light going into your eyes. You have no control over how that light is decoded or the images that are presented to the optic nerve. Your eyes do this as a subsystem. Your eyes cannot function with an external, non-sympathetic system put into them. You can put in inert systems. You can put in glass. You can put in plastic that does not actively involve things. But so far, every time that the human body has had any kind of an active chip stuff put in it, and even seen this now in dogs, where they put chips in the dogs and the other animals to just keep them alive and not harm them or anything, even those chips, what happens to them? Well, the body says, hey, here's an active energetic field. And in a feng shui sort of acupuncture way, it starts sending crap there to cover it up because it can't deal with this energetic field operating at frequencies that are not harmonious to the cells around it. And that's what will occur in the eye. Only in the other, in your senses, the eyes, ears, taste buds and olfactories and so on, these will occur very rapidly because these are entirely separate subsystems, not under the control of the general body, that are entirely conscious of their function, although not conscious of themselves. They don't know they're your eyes, for instance, but they know they're supposed to accept light, transmit it, and do this job, and they do that for you. And they won't do it if you were to put a small little bit of electrical stuff in there for very long. That very long will depend on how energetic your body is at dealing with these kind of things or lack thereof. But you'll note we cannot keep people alive on machines, no matter how much we may want to. Even people that are paralyzed, that have every reason to have an active, conscious effort to want this stuff to work, are not able to overcome the debilitating effects of having these energetic fields put into the human body at that level. And it has nothing to do with whether they're magnetic or DNA or anything. It has to do with the nature of the energy, because humans are energy. Matter doesn't exist as this solid that everybody seems to think is this immutable, impermeable, or permanent kind of stuff. It just, sorry guys, just that isn't the way reality works.
That's fine. And this question, I'll get your answer on the other side, but let me end with this. You include quote-unquote fiat currency as a keyword in the latest Alta. I heard that even Trump wants to quote-unquote revisit the current Federal Reserve System as it is today. I think both, Lincoln and Kennedy tried to do something about it, and we know what happened to them. What do you see happening to the fiat currency? And we'll get the answer on the other side. How can people buy this report and all the other reports?
You can purchase the reports by going to halfpasthuman.com, scroll down a little bit past our little kudos page, and you'll see an Alta sales area, and it's called the Alta report, the Asymmetric Linguistic Trends Analysis report, and we have one for just December at $15, and then if you wanted to buy one that covers the whole all of the ones for this last year, we've got a special going out to 13 of them for $99.
That's great. And folks, so much more when we come back. A lot of projections for 2017 and beyond. Here with Clif High from halfpasthuman.com. This is Mel Fabregas, and you are listening to Veritas, Season 9 premiere. Thank you for joining us. We'll be right back. Thanks for listening to part 1 of this very important Veritas interview. To listen to the rest, head on over to the member section or subscribe at veritasradio.com. You don't want to miss the rest. Don't forget to visit the Veritas store for lots of great products. Thank you.